H.P. Lovecraft's The Call of Cthulhu.
A screencast by Brody Wedgeworth.
Chelsea Sabella.
Y'all praise Cthulhu now.
Now, before we talk about The Tale of Cthulhu, we must first talk about the original great old one, Howard Phillips Lovecraft. Howard Phillips Lovecraft was born to Sarah Susan Phillips and Winfield Scott Lovecraft on August 20, 1890 in Providence, Rhode Island.
A couple of things from the time of Lovecraft's birth. Benjamin Harrison was president of the U.S., Idaho and Wyoming became states, Dutch painter Vincent van Gogh died, the first entirely steel-frame building was erected in Chicago, and the Battle of Wounded Knee occurred.
Lovecraft died of cancer and Bright's disease, now known as kidney disease, on March 15, 1937 in Providence, Rhode Island.
At the time of his death, FDR was president, George VI was crowned King of England, Amelia Earhart disappeared over the Pacific Ocean, the Hindenburg exploded, and the Golden Gate Bridge was opened in San Francisco.
Major Lovecraft critic Donald Burleson wrote that Lovecraft was inspired by other writers such as Edgar Allan Poe, Nathaniel Hawthorne, Lord Dunsany, and Arthur Machen.
Poe is going to be Lovecraft's main inspiration until he writes Cthulhu. Hawthorne is going to provide many of the themes and motifs in Lovecraft's work. Lord Dunsany is going to provide the rich language and cosmic point of view, and that's why Lovecraft's prose is so dense. Arthur Machen gave him the idea that horror suspected is better than horror seen. One of the really cool things about Lovecraft is how aware he was of his own failings. So, here are a couple of quotes that explains his strange ways. I preach and practice an extreme conservatism in art forms, society, and politics as the only means of averting the ennui, despair, and confusion of a guideless and standardless struggle with the unveiled chaos. And you can see why he's so dramatic. Also, doubtless I am the sort of shock purveyor condemned by the critics of the urbane tradition as decadent or culturally immature, but I can't resist the fascination of the outside's mythical shadowland, and I really have a fairly respectable line of literary predecessors to back me up. And here he's probably going to be referencing Poe, who he idolized. Also, the critic J. Vernon Shea writes that Lovecraft himself, acutely and perhaps unnecessarily conscious of his own literary shortcomings, once wrote in a letter that there were his Poesque tales and his Dunsanian tales, but where were his Lovecraftian stories?
Despite Lovecraft's many writing strength, he fails to deliver quality when it comes to dialogue. This opinion is shared by Stephen King, who admits in On Writing, H.P. Lovecraft was a genius when it came to tales of the macabre, but a terrible dialogue writer. He seemed to have known it too, because in the millions of words of fiction he wrote, fewer than 5,000 are dialogue. To the right is an example of Lovecraft's poor dialogue from his tale The Shadow over Innsmouth, which is thankfully not present in The Call of Cthulhu. And here is Brody Wedgeworth with a sampling of Lovecraft's horrible dialogue.
And this is the important part, young feller. Them is turned into fish things and went into the water. Wouldn't never die. Them things never died, except they was killed violent.
The critic L. Sprague de Camp wrote that in August 1925, Lovecraft had an idea for another story, which he tentatively called The Call of Cthulhu. He wrote an outline but put it aside at the time. The tale was later written on his return to Providence, Rhode Island in 1926, and tells the tale of Francis Wayland Thurston, the grandnephew of Professor George Angell, as he discovers his granduncle's fatal interest in a rising cult which practices human sacrifice and the worship of an ancient being named Cthulhu. Cthulhu, a monstrous grand priest, belongs to a race known as the Great Old Ones. These beings are controlled by the positions of the stars and appear to want nothing more than to rule the earth as they once did ages ago. Through accounts of those who came into contact with cult members, and later Cthulhu himself, Thurston discovers a frightening truth about the cosmos. Humans are minuscule beings next to the greatness of the Old Ones, and when the stars are in place, the world will be forfeit to their murderous rampages.
There are three main themes in Cthulhu. The first is going to be humanity's insignificance. Donald Burleson is going to identify this theme as denied primacy, the notion that we human beings were not the first lords of this planet, and indeed have never really been its lords. Next will be the theme of ignorance, or merciful ignorance as identified by Burleson. The theme that there are species of knowledge only by ignorance of which humankind can maintain even the semblance of well-being. This ties into the theme of illusory surface appearances. That is, the theme that things are not as they appear on the surface, below which deeper and more terrible realities are masked. Burleson is going to do a cool thing and tie all of these themes into a broader theme which he calls the Lovecraftian super theme, which is the ruinous nature of self-knowledge, the notion that when we as humans come to look upon the cosmos as it is, we find our own place in it to be soul-crushingly evanescent. The narrative structure in Cthulhu is fairly complicated. The text begins with a colophon, which is a brief description of publication or production notes. In this case, the colophon lets readers know that the manuscript was found in the papers of the late Francis Wayland Thurston. The Lovecraft critic Donald Burleson writes that the colophon is a self-referential comment, as if the text has said, "I am found among the notes of the late Thurston." The maker of this comment would seem to be a kind of exo-narrator, and the exo-narrator is the text itself. So the text acts as a kind of exterior narrator. It is a found thing. After the colophon comes a quote from Algernon Blackwood's 1911 novel, The Centaur, which is going to set the mood for the themes of Cthulhu. Now, Cthulhu is going to be a frame story, or a story within a story. Donald Burleson is going to write that if one counts Cthulhu and counts the self-commenting exo-narrator, or the text itself, there are sometimes as many as 9 layers, sometimes as few as 4. This is a tad overkill in my opinion. Lovecraft critic Peter Cannon writes that the story consists of 3 distinct narratives that in turn incorporate other accounts. I think this is much more reasonable to approach the narrative structure of the text. So, the story is told in 3 chapters. The Horror in Clay describes Professor Angel's studies and death. The Tale of Inspector Legrasse describes Legrasse's encounter with the voodoo cult and his meeting with the anthropologists. And The Madness from the Sea describes the events of Johansen and the other sailors. The writer and narrator of the text is Francis, who is a homodiegetic narrator. In other words, Francis is describing events that happened to him in the first person. He is also the focalizer for the piece. This means that all of the events, situations, and interpretations are going to be filtered to us, the readers, through Francis. For example, Francis does this by summarizing his uncle's and Johansen's manuscripts to the reader. This will make him a fixed focalizer. All of the narrative facts and events are filtered through Francis.
Lovecraft and Cthulhu have had a powerful control over popular culture lately. A simple Google search for Cthulhu yields results that reveal the modern fetishizing of Lovecraft's work. What was once a frightening literary figure is now a cute plush or a comedic figure, appearing in such shows as South Park and an animated short aptly named The Adventure of Little Cthulhu by Zachary Murray. One director who has picked up this influence is Guillermo del Toro, a Mexican film director and novelist. He has produced multiple works that show the Cthulhu mythos, which is a term used by critics to describe otherworldly landscapes, legends, and mythology created purely by Lovecraft in his movies such as Hellboy and Pacific Rim. His fondness for Lovecraft's works have led him to commission a statue of the author in his personal library. First, let's look at 2004's Hellboy. Lovecraft's influence on director Guillermo del Toro is evident in this movie, the plot of which revolves around the release of the 7 gods of chaos, also known as the Ogdru Jahad. These gods are inspired by Lovecraft's Great Old Ones and similarly existed before humanity and desire to cause destruction on a massive scale. To the right of the screen are screenshots from the movie of Ogdru Jahad breaking free from their prison, akin to Cthulhu from the stony relay and later descending to Earth. Their massive tentacles, seen right here, are reminiscent of Cthulhu's. Both creatures seem somewhat amphibious. A more recent film of Guillermo del Toro's that presents the Cthulhu mythos is Pacific Rim. There's a quote from the book that really shows how heavy this influence was on Del Toro. It is, "We always thought alien life would come from the stars, but it came from beneath the sea." His most recent film, it emphasizes the themes found in Lovecraft's The Call of Cthulhu, which revolve around an extraterrestrial force putting humanity in its true place, beneath the claws of gargantuan aliens, in this case known as the Kaiju. Now, the Kaiju have a visual resemblance to Cthulhu. They are big, they are amphibious, They're often covered in tentacles, but both beings also come from the stars, yet they arise from beneath the Pacific Ocean. Also, Cthulhu's cults are echoed in the religious faction of Del Toro's universe, whose members believe the kaiju come to Earth as a divine punishment for humanity's sins. Their churches are often built around the bones of fallen kaiju. However, they are not nearly as into human sacrificing and violence as Cthulhu's cults. Now, though Lovecraft's influence on Del Toro is clear in the imagery, setting, and chosen antagonistic forces in the kaiju, there is a big difference, and it is the Jaeger system that separate the overall messages of their respective works. Where it seems that Lovecraft is saying that humanity will be taken over, there's nothing you can do about it, Del Toro seems to suggest that we will rise to the occasion. So unlike Lovecraft's great old ones, Del Toro's monsters are not unstoppable, nor is humanity as feeble as they seem. As the kaiju cross the portal between their world and ours, known as the Breach, they are met by these giant manned robots, the Jaegers. So whether it is through merchandising or influences on directors to make movies or books, Lovecraft still has a heavy presence in today's literary works, as well as more commercial things.
Hey there, Cthulhu, down there in your sunken city. You're a billion light years distant, and the stars look very pretty from relay. So close and yet so far away. E-A-E-A. Cthulhu Fatagan, or is that Cthulhu Fatine? I can never quite remember, 'cause I'm not in my right mind since I met you. No one corrupts the way you do. You know it's true. Oh, it's what you'll do